Good afternoon, readers. It's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf, and welcome to day 5 of Victorian Poetry Afternoon, I guess. So our poet for today is somebody that I hadn't heard of until I turned the page in this book yesterday, and his name is Arthur Hugh Clough. I'm going to call him Clough, not Clough, because that comes more naturally to me, but this is how you spell his name. You can see that there. So he is kind of a Victorian English poet, but he's also a bit of an American poet. He grew up in the United States and spent some time there when he was older as well, kind of split between the two countries and a little bit around Europe. He unfortunately died in Florence. He went there to regain his health and died of malaria, which I suppose at the time he could have caught the malaria in the UK, because there was malaria in the southern parts of the United Kingdom at that point, but I just felt like that was exceptionally bad luck. Not a very well-fated expedition. So the only connection that I can find with Arthur Hugh Clough and other Victorian poets, because I like that they're all kind of a little bit interconnected, and not only are they writing about the same kind of themes and time periods, but often it turns out that they kind of all knew each other. Like, these eminent Victorians had their little clubs and circles where they all kind of got to know each other. So like, earlier we've had Elizabeth Browning and Robert Browning, who were married, and they knew Elizabeth Gaskell, not maybe the closest friendship, and then Elizabeth Gaskell was friends with Emily Bronte, who we had yesterday. Like, there's these kind of overlapping little groups of people, but the only person that Arthur Hugh Clough that overlaps with that I know of is Matthew Arnold, who was another Victorian poet, and apparently they were close friends, and Matthew Arnold wrote various poems that were kind of tributes to Arthur Hugh Clough, who was apparently a little bit of an interesting character. So I've mentioned that he moved a lot between England and the United States, but he also had some kind of religious issues, I suppose, in his life, and it says in his little introduction that he was racked with doubts about his religious commitments, doubts that in due course left him distinctly post-Christian. In 1848 he felt himself unable to sign assent to the 39 Articles, the tenets of Anglicanism's Protestant identity, then a requirement of Oxford Fellows, and he resigned his position at Oxford because of it. And that obviously has to remind me of Mr. Hale in North and South, who has this very comfortable position as a clergyman, and because of his doubts and his conscience, is led to resign that position and put himself into a much more difficult situation in life. And that does seem to have been, to a certain extent, the case for Arthur Hugh Clough, because he after that period, he never has such a settled life again. I tell a lie. So there was another person in the circles of Victorians that you will have heard of, that Clough did get to know, and that is Florence Nightingale, who was his cousin-in-law, and he threw himself into support for her work on, I guess, setting up nursing care in various places, and apparently overexerted himself in support for her efforts. So yeah, just a little bit of interesting background information about Arthur Hugh Clough. So the poem that I am going to read to you was written, I think, in 1849, which is just after he's had his post-Christian doubt thing that's got him kicked out of Oxford, and I believe he is travelling in Italy at the time, and it is called Say Not the Struggle, Nought Availeth. Say not the struggle, nought availeth, the labour and the wounds are vain. The enemy faints not, nor faileth, and as things have been, things remain. If hopes were dupes, fears may be liars. It may be, in yon smoke concealed, your comrades chase e'en now the fliers, and but for you possess the field. For while the tired waves, vainly breaking, seem here no painful inch to gain, far back through creeks and inlets making came silent, flooding in the main. And not by eastern windows only, when daylight comes in the light. In front the sun climbs how slowly, but westward, look, the land is bright. So I had a bit of a go at Emily Bronte yesterday for having a sing-song rhythm and a diligently obeyed rhyming scheme. And yeah, So yeah, I have mentioned that it is a feature that I like about Victorian poetry, that it does tend to have a strict rhythm and it does tend to have a strict rhyme. But perhaps this is teaching me the benefits of there being a variety of poetic forms, shall I say? Because the rhythm and the rhyme, to me, in this extract, is very similar to Shall Earth No More inspire thee, which we had yesterday. It is slightly different. So, shall earth no more inspire thee, thou lonely dreamer now. Say not the struggle, nought availeth, the labour and the wounds are vain. Like, the lines are longer, but the kind of every other beat, da-da-da-da kind of thing, is very, very similar. And it's even more rigid than Emily Bronte's, I think. There's not even any rhyme that you could doubt is correct, if that makes sense. But I do think it's a lovely poem, and in many ways I like it more than I did yesterday's poem. To me, it's a poem about hope, and it's a poem about being in that dark and difficult place where you can't quite see the end and you can't quite see the way out, and you think that you're on your own and you're fighting against this thing, whatever that thing is, and you are just getting nowhere. And yeah, say not the struggle, nought availeth. Like, you are struggling and struggling and struggling, and you feel like you are everything you do is in vain. But it's not the case, or what the author would have you think and try to believe is that it's not the case, that maybe you can't see it from where you are, but around you, concealed, there is success elsewhere in the thing that you're working towards. And I guess it's a relevant poem for the Victorian time, because when you look back at the immense amount of progress and change that happened in that period, it seems to be one huge struggle, and it seems to be constant battling over certain issues and people trying to push each other forward and also push each other down a little bit, and this sense of actually some of them hesitating and trying to give each other hope in the sense of the forward momentum that they're going into. I like a little bit better. I like the metaphors and the images that he uses. Obviously not as elegantly done as Tennyson in Crossing the Bar, but I like the image of the battlefield, like, clouded in smoke, and you can't see that, you feel like you're losing, but you can't see that actually your comrades are winning and victorious, and it's just you that's in the wrong place to see it. I like the image of the sea moving in, and I like that the sunrise image. We've had quite a few sunrises and sunsets so far. We had a sunset in Crossing the Bar, we had a sunset in Shall Earth No More inspire thee. Yeah, I guess they're great food for poetic writing. Yeah, because it's true what he says about the sunrise, and not by eastern windows only, when daylight comes in the light. And I like the idea of somebody just staring at a fixed point, and it's like can't see the wood for the trees almost, but said in a much more poetic manner. And you're kind of tunnel vision on the one thing that you're working towards, and you don't see that everything is actually coming together around you, and this idea that you could kind of like turn around and notice that it is daytime and everything has come together. I find that quite pleasant. It's almost like it's almost like lines from a film, if that makes sense. I have recently, things to do while you're in self-isolation, rewatched the whole of The Lord of the Rings, obviously. And it kind of reminds me of the kinds of things that characters in that say is kind of like pseudo-religious, mythological support for one another, the kind of sometimes very direct statements about hope and the future and, you know, what is worth fighting for. And that's how this comes across sometimes. Like, it's not really a practical everyday poem, but it's a poem that tries to offer some kind of inspiration. And what I like about it is that the inspiration is apparently secular, presumably because of Clough's religious doubts, although him having religious doubts doesn't mean that he wasn't still believing in a kind of a Christian system. A lot of the time, I think, in Victorian poetry, you would see this kind of imagery used in support of religious ends, if that makes sense. It does say that it has been set to music as a hymn, and you can see why, because if you read it in that way and you interpret it as that God's behind you, making the sun rise through the western side as well, and that kind of thing, like it does have that kind of religious power. But I like that it's not explicit in it, and you can interpret it in a way that doesn't require a God to support those images. But yeah, much as I like it, I feel like it would benefit from just a tiny bit more originality in the use of rhythm and rhyme. Is it fair to say that? I don't know. I'm going to read it again and see if anything else comes to me. And then I will leave you to comment and think. And just before I do, I'm just thinking about alliteration and repetition. Because those are kind of poetic techniques that we haven't really talked about much so far in this kind of poetry discussion thing. The enemy faints not nor faileth has got a really pretty like FNNF, if that makes sense. It like makes a really nice phrase together. I don't know whether it was an existing phrase when he wrote it, but it sounds like it's a quote from somewhere almost. The enemy faints not nor faileth, like you're fighting against this enemy and they're not giving in, and it adds to the weight of the line and the idea of the struggle that the person is undergoing. The word vain comes up twice, talking about this struggle that the person is going through, so the repetition again adds to the weight of the difficulties that they're going through. And another word that is repeated is the sun climbs slow, how slowly, which, yeah, it all just contributes to that overall sense of just running into a wall and hitting your head against a wall. And the thing that I was reminded of when I was reading this poem is the situation that we're living in now, and the situation of COVID, and the feeling like we are doing lots and lots of little things that don't seem to be getting us anywhere, and indeed a lot of the time we seem to be going backwards. But potentially if we were able to look at the broader picture and be able to say, we've made this much progress in terms of what we know about this disease, we've made this much progress in terms of work on vaccines for this disease, then you could see the broader picture is actually looking more hopeful than the individual moment-to-moment basis. So yeah, trying to bring things topical to the present day. So I'll read it again. Say not the struggle nought availeth, the labour and the wounds are vain, the enemy faints not nor faileth, and as things have been, things remain. If hopes were dupes, fears may be liars. It may be in yon smoke concealed, your comrades chase e'en now the fliers, and but for you possess the field. For while the tired waves vainly breaking seem here no painful inch to gain, far back through creeks and inlets making came silent, flooding in the main. And not by eastern windows only, when daylight comes in the light. In front the sun climbs slow, how slowly, but westward, look, the land is bright. Yeah, I think it's lovely. In its own way. And it's like the truth of, particularly those later two verses, it's true that when you stand on the beach and you can't see the tide coming in, you can watch the sun rising, but you can't put a time on the point where the whole of the sky becomes light. And the very slow pace of those things kind of illustrates the author's point just perfectly, so it's a really good choice of metaphor there, I think. Yeah, like I said, just not completed with the elegance of Tennyson's metaphor in Crossing the Bar. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this poem, and tomorrow we will be moving on to, there's quite a lot of this Clough guy, Matthew Arnold, so we're going on to the Friend, so that will be a nice combination. Okay, take care.